1. As of writing this, I've been living and working in China for 14 months and 22 days. So you can guess I've had a bit of time to travel during the holidays. This incident happened last year in July. I was invited by my closest Chinese friend, Jay at the time, to travel all the way back to his hometown with him for the summer. Unfortunately, he's a really poor bloke and lives really far up in northern China, pretty much in Inner Mongolia. Anyway, the majority of the trip had nothing worthy of this subreddit bar this incident, which happened as we started making our return journey. We had decided to spend the night in Jiangbei City, the closest real city to Jay's home village, to meet with some of his high school mates. We spent the final hours of our son cooking barbecue out of a portion of roof guttering, Chinese ingenuity, and I had listened to them chat on in Chinese well into the night. After the fire had died and we had packed up, my companion's attention turned to the bright neon KTV sign looming over the hill. For those of you who don't know, KTV is a very popular karaoke and hotel thingy in China. You can rent small, medium or large rooms and sing your heart out all night. In contrast, you could also take advantage of the purchased privacy to carry out practices you couldn't do elsewhere. In the past, I have seen hopelessly drunk groups of Chinese men using the rooms to offer patronage to the ladies of the night, as well as interesting certain recreational substances. The point is, KTVs are often used by questionable people for questionable reasons, and in a remote city such as Jiangbei, which the government has a much looser grip over, well, let's just say we probably shouldn't have gone there. As we approach the entrance, I see two heavily built and shirtless Chinese guys smoking against the wall. They also spot me. Now, Jiangbei is a little-known place, with nothing much to see or do, so you can certainly assume that foreigners don't visit there very often at all. So these two guys light up when they see me and come thundering over, screaming the only English I think they knew, which was, "I love you!" Before I knew what was going on, the two men were practically dragging me inside, eager to present their newest amusement to their friends inside. We were ushered into a large room filled with shirtless men. The place reeked of strong spirits. The lights were dim and the music was blaring. The back wall was lined with a long couch and flanked by an equally long glass table, completely adorned with bottles of beer, spirits, and juice. Each of the men all had similar tattoos ranging in size and location on their bodies, and just the sight of them made me uncomfortable. There aren't too many gangs in my small home country, but I know enough to understand that gangs often show their affiliation through matching tattoos. They all lit up as their friend proudly introduced my friends, and I was promptly forced down onto a couch between two sweaty guys, and had all manner of alcoholic drinks shoved in my face. I suddenly guessed this is what it must be like to be an attractive woman in a sleazy nightclub, and I didn't like it one bit. I tried my best to politely decline every suspicious drink pushed my way, and tried my best to look photogenic for the hundreds of selfies each member wanted to take with me. After some time, the men became more drunk, and they all began dancing in the center of the room. Again, I was forcibly relocated to a place I didn't particularly want to go, the center of the mosh pit. Then they started grabbing at my clothes, just my shirt, thankfully. I guess they wanted me to be like them, shirtless. I wasn't too comfortable with that, so I wrenched it back down. This display of defiance seemed to anger them as my shirt was forcibly torn upwards, with so much strength that it smacked my nose in a direction it shouldn't usually go, and sent my sunglasses that were hanging from my collar flying up and breaking against the ceiling. Now at this point I'm feeling pretty nervous, but I try to play it cool by dancing like everyone else, and shooting help me glances to Jay. But he didn't seem to share my anxiety for the situation. Then the guy you really don't want to meet joined me in the center of the group of men. He was scrawnier than his fellow gang members, but he had a huge scab on his forearm near the elbow. I remembered him from earlier when he proudly pointed to it and said something about it, but all I could understand was Dao, which means knife in Mandarin. Obviously a guy who'd been in a few fights. Scab Man is obviously drunk, and he's looking at me in a very uncomfortable way. He's looking me up and down the way a creep checks a woman out, except I'm not a woman. He looks me up and down a few more times while running his thumb along between his groin and the elastic band of his shorts. Then he lunges forward at my own shorts. Tries to yank them down the same way I had lost my shirt. Suddenly, I was really fucking freaked out. I didn't want this to continue, so I tried to get Jay's attention. I found to my horror that I couldn't even see Jay. The men had all closed in on Scabman and I, trapping me in a very small circular area. Scabman lunged at my shorts again, and I grabbed his arm, saying the only Chinese that I knew that fit this situation. "Mei yo, mei yo, mei yo," or "no, no, no." Then Jay's head poked through the crowd. "Hey bro, I'm gonna piss," he slurred. I grabbed his arm and quickly slid through the crowd to the door. Some men tried to stop us, but Jay said the equivalent of, "It's cool, we're just gonna piss to them" in Chinese, and we left the room. I immediately bolted out of the building, sending Jay a text telling him how much of an asshole he was, and to go get my fucking shirt and come the fuck outside so I could get out of here. After we regrouped a safe distance away, he explained to me that they had gotten him insanely drunk, and he was leaning against a wall in a fucked up state, until the overwhelming need to piss gave him the motivation to move. It's lucky he did. I don't want to imagine how that situation would have proceeded. 2. I attend a liberal arts college in a Hispanic southern city which happens to be a popular tourist attraction. My sophomore year, summer of 2007, my friends and I lived in what was dubbed the gravel pit, which was exactly that, a row of houses that sat facing each other on a gravel driveway/pit. The pit was located on kind of a sketchy street, but was located a short walking distance to the main strip of bars, so it was a particular living spot for sophomores at my college. After a debauchery-filled year living there, my roommates and I all decided to move elsewhere after the year was over. Like I said, it was mostly a sophomore year hotbed. I was the last one to move out during the summer of '07, and thus had to spend one night in the house alone before moving the next day. As a quick note, I was notoriously bad about locking the front door back then. I would only think to lock the door and when I was going to bed and sober, hence not a lot during sophomore year. I had a designer purse stolen upon drunkenly leaving it on the porch. I have since learned better. It was about 6 p.m. when my now former roomie and one of my best friends, Pam, called me to ask if she could stay with me at the house even though she'd technically moved out. Parking was and is a bitch in this city, and her parking permit wouldn't go into effect until the next day, so she was worried about it getting towed. I enthusiastically agreed. I didn't have to spend my last night in the house alone. Yay! Pam gets to the house around 6 p.m. and immediately locks the front door upon arriving, something I obviously had not done at the time and wouldn't have done until going to bed that night. It should be noted that my room was a first-floor bedroom, with a door that led directly outside to our side porch, which was immediately accessible to anyone walking by. So we're sitting in my room watching TV when we hear it. Someone frantically jiggling the front doorknob trying to get in. Pam and I looked at each other in horror, but chalked it up to typical gravel pit shenanigans, a drunk person, etc. The only unnerving part was how insistent the person was. They must have jiggled the handle for 2 to 3 minutes. It finally stops. Pam and I look at each other in relief and proceed to finish watching TV. But then we proceed to hear the person stomp over to the side porch, aka the side of the porch that leads directly into my bedroom. Homeboy then proceeds to bang on the door outside my bedroom, before spending another minute trying to jiggle the locked doorknob and force himself in. After several terrifying minutes of this, we peek out the window to see a disheveled man with his hand in his pocket, trying with all his might to get in. As I'm frozen in fear, especially because it was an old house and his increased force could have easily broken through the wooden door. Pam just yells, "No!" The banging stops for a bit, and we think he's gone for good, until he proceeds to cross the porch again and again, proceed to try and bang down the locked front door. As Pam is calling 911, I have since realized my immediate response to danger is to freeze. Thank God for Pam. He then returns to the side door to my room and proceeds to aggressively try to force his way into my bedroom. The police show up a short time later and the man is gone, and all we had was a vague description of him from when we snuck a peek from the blinds. Police found the guy was nowhere to be found, but the creepiest part is what they did find. There were chicken bones littered all over the porch and outside the porch entryway and door to my bedroom. Plus there was some scattered in the bushes outside of our place. Nothing came of it though, and the police just told us to call if it happened again and to leave our doors locked. I constantly wonder what would have happened had Pam not stayed with me and been there. If she hadn't, my front door would have been unlocked and Chicken Bone Man would have certainly gotten into my house to do God knows what. I've never been so grateful for Pam's parking issue that led her to stay with me. Not to mention that I was moving out of that horror show the next day. I no longer reside in that city, but still make it a point to lock the door as soon as I walk in, versus when I'm simply going to bed. That said, Chicken Bone Man who was hell-bent on getting into my house, let's not meet again. 3. This story takes place 3 months ago at a karaoke bar. My boyfriend's older sister, Angie, and I went out for the first time together. We went to this, bar that hosts a karaoke night every Friday night. She had a guy friend, Paul, who met us there, who had a crush on her, and he bought us drinks the whole night. We were having a good time. It was 2 a.m. and we were sitting outside because both Paul and Angie smoke, but I don't. But because I didn't want to stay in there alone or anything, I went with her. We found a wooden table with bench-like seats. The two of them sat on one side of the table and I was on the other side by myself talking with them. Some random guy, Pete, was behind me standing 3 feet away leaning on the wall, but he was close enough that I could see him if I moved my eyes to the left a bit. Angie is very outgoing, and so as we were talking she ended up asking him some question. I can't remember what she asked because I wasn't paying attention to them, but rather the people who were talking around us. But he ended up responding and was slowly approaching my side of the table. Once he got to my side, he sat down beside me, at which I already started to get a weird vibe from him. I was talking to Angie about something when I stopped. Pete started asking where I was from, since it's clear I'm not from England, since I have no British accent. So I told him I'm from Canada, and he told me he worked for immigration at the airport, to which I said, "Oh, nice," not showing much interest. He asked what I could possibly be doing here, and I replied by telling him I was here visiting my boyfriend. Angie was even talking about how she was here with her brother's girlfriend, me, to other people she was having conversations with. Pete had both his arms resting on the table, one of his hands holding a glass of whatever he was drinking that night, and then moved the hand that was closest to me and put it on his lap. But being that I'm a very observant person, I noticed this and was starting to already feel uncomfortable. As Angie and Paul were talking about stuff with the other people who were outside, because my hand was resting on my lap, he moved over on the bench to be closer to me, and reached for my hand and held it, but really firm and hard. I quickly pulled it away and moved myself over a bit on the wooden bench, and put my hand that he just held on the table and onto my drink. He put it back in his lap, and within a few minutes later, he was reaching under the table again, but this time he grabbed my knee and held it. I pushed the hand away again and repeated, "I have a boyfriend," to him. And even Angie was like, "Dude, she has a boyfriend," in case you didn't hear it the first 3 times we said it. So we carry on outside for the next hour. And when it gets to 3 a.m. when the bar closes, Angie and I were going back home, but she decided she wanted to hang out at Paul's house for a bit, and drink more there and shit. So I agreed. But all of a sudden Pete asked, "Oh well, can I come with you? I'm only here for tonight, and I go back to where I live tomorrow." And Angie said, "I mean, it's not my house, but if my friend is fine with it, sure." So Paul allowed him to come along to his place with us. Angie called an Uber to get us to Paul's house. While we waited at the table for the Uber, Pete said, "You can go back to my hotel room and wait for an Uber." "I'm staying right here." The bar was part of the hotel. So Angie of course agreed, but I didn't like that idea so much, because he kept saying how pretty we look, etc. The entire time we are going to his hotel, and plus, I didn't know how to get home myself since I had no idea even where I was, so I just followed them. We get in the room and we wait 10 minutes for the Uber. The whole time Pete is full on staring at us and smirking and shit for God knows whatever the reason was. We got to her friend's house. Pete is flirting with me and even rubbed my leg again when I was sitting on the floor because I wasn't feeling too good. Skip to when we all leave. Pete tells us he was going to book an Uber for himself, so naturally, Angie and I book a separate Uber to get home. But I ended up glancing down at his phone when he was booking the Uber, and he never actually booked a ride. He was just chilling on the app, acting like he was. I thought this weird. So 15 minutes later our Uber is outside. It's like 5 AM now. Pete was like, "Hey, can I just hop in there with you two?" And Angie replied kind of hesitantly like, okay. But I thought your Uber was on its way though. And he was like, "I don't know," but with the weirdest tone in his voice. So he has a smoke outside the car. He smokes as well before getting in. Her and I are in the car with the driver. And that's when I tell her that he never actually booked a ride for himself. We both looked at one another for a few seconds in confusion, and you could tell now that she was seeming to be a bit more cautious with what she was doing or saying with him. So plan was the Uber was gonna drop us two off first, then take him to wherever he was going. So because of this, she asks the driver to take us to the road before the one with our house on it, because she didn't want him to know where we lived because now she really didn't trust him. Pete finally gets into the car. I'm on the right side, she is in the middle, and he gets in on the left. The whole time I can hear him trying to flirt with her and saying some shit like, "Wanna hook up?" And then at one point he was like, "She can join in too." Angie kept saying no a bunch of times to him. I was looking out the window because I didn't want to look at him at all, but when he said that I gave him a weird look. But I don't think he really paid any attention to it. I looked back out my window. This is when I got a lot more weird and creepy. He kept saying he was coming home with us and not going back to wherever he was going. He was not letting up on coming with us. Angie told him we were walking home after a certain point, because she didn't have the money to pay the whole ride, which obviously was a lie. And he was like, "That's okay, I'll just follow you home. We can have a good time." So finally, after like 10 minutes of this, she was like, "Can you pull over?" to the driver. And he was very confused by this, probably because he never got asked this, and said, she was like, "Please, pull over, now." And so he did. Pete started to wonder why she was doing this and asked, "What are you doing, babe?" And she was like, "I told you, you aren't coming with us back home, get out." At this time I was looking at him directly. He was getting angry because he wasn't getting out of the car. So she started raising her voice and was like, "We aren't moving until you get the fuck out of this car and call yourself a different Uber." Pete started to get kind of serious now and was like, "Why? What did I do? I'm sorry," etc. And she just replied, "Leave." To that he told her he was only leaving if she gave him her number. She refused. Then he told us he wasn't leaving the car until she did so. And she said fine. She took his phone, put in some random number she thought of and gave it back to him. He was still trying to convince her to let him stay with us, but she wasn't having it, and told him bye. He got out of the car finally, and she slammed his door shut, and told the Uber to get away from there and take us home. I was worried next time I went to that bar that Pete would be there, but I haven't seen him since this situation. I always wondered what would have happened if Angie wasn't as outgoing as she was and kicked him out of the car. I think we would have been in some serious trouble. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 3 True Scary Stories, episode 302. Thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Well, hope you folks had a nice weekend. It's a Monday for me, so that's a recording day. I'll be doing the next 2 days' videos. Let's see, Tuesday, that's it's not a subscriber week, so it'll be something else, not quite sure what. I may try and do a hotel video, we'll see. I've been getting some issues with the hotel videos. Not really sure why. Anyway, we'll see. Also, before I head off, I want to apologize if there's any irritating bird chirping sounds in this video. I was recording this one kind of earlier, but 4 in the morning I think it was, thereabouts. maybe a bit later. I can't remember exactly. And I think I got most of them, but there may have been some of the chirpy little buggers in the background. So if any snuck through, I do apologise. I did my best to eliminate it. And with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.